The distress signal came in on 17 frequencies at once. Commander Dara Voss heard it from the bridge of the Ardent before the tactical officer even had time to route it to his station, because the Ardent's hull was old enough that her receivers sometimes pulled raw transmissions before the filters could tidy them. The voice that filled the bridge was female, speaking Galactic Standard with a clipped Verath accent, and the words cut through the low hum of the ship's engines like a blade through fog. "We're losing the battle!" A pause, static, then the same voice, higher and cracked at the edges now, overlapping with a second voice, and a third, all of them in different dialects, all saying variations of the same thing. "We're losing the battle. All coalition forces in the Tyran Reach are in retreat. Requesting immediate reinforcement. Repeat. We are losing the battle." Voss stood at the center console and listened to it for 3 full seconds before he did anything. That was a habit the Admiralty had tried to beat out of him at the Academy and failed. 3 seconds. Long enough to hear the whole shape of a crisis before reacting to it. Long enough to know what you were actually dealing with. What he was dealing with was a 6-system coalition, the Verath Compact, the Sindari Merchant Guilds, the Hollow Ring Confederacy, and 3 smaller partners, screaming across open channels that the Dravari Advance Fleet had punched through the Tyran Reach defense line and was 40 minutes from the Sindari hub world of Kesavor. Kesavor had a population of 900 million. Voss looked at his tactical display. It showed him exactly what the galaxy apparently expected Earth to show in response to this. Nothing. Because Earth had nothing to send. The 3rd Combined Fleet was 2 days out from the Reach, still refueling at Hollis Station after the campaign at Meridian Cross. The 2nd was committed at the Dravari Southern Salient. The 1st was the 1st. And nobody in Earth Space Command sent the 1st anywhere without a unanimous vote from 4 admirals and a civilian review board. What Earth did have, sitting at the mouth of the Tyran Reach, was 1 ship. The Ardent. She was a Halcyon-class destroyer, 31 years old. She'd been refitted twice, and her port engine had a temperamental tertiary ejector that the crew called the Senator, because it complained constantly and never actually did anything. She carried a crew of 208. A full complement of ship-killer missiles, 2 particle lances, and a point defense grid that her weapons officer, Lieutenant Cho, maintained with a devotion that bordered on the religious. She was not a fleet. She was not a force. She was 1 ship. Voss keyed his comms. "Ensign Prahl, route that distress signal to command and mark it priority 1. Helm, bring us to the edge of the Reach. Navigation, I want a complete picture of the Tyran engagement zone in 4 minutes." "Sir," said his XO, Lieutenant Commander Adisa, appearing at his elbow with the quiet efficiency that made her the best officer he'd ever served beside. "Command's response? Command is going to tell us to hold position and await orders." He pulled up the navigation display and studied the Reach's geography. The dense asteroid band called the Shroud that formed its outer rim. The gap at Passage 7 that the Dravari Advance would almost certainly be using, the distances. Which is the correct thing for them to tell us? Adisa looked at the display. She was quiet for a moment. Then, and I'm going to acknowledge the order, note our position in the log, and then we're going to go see what's happening in the Reach. She was silent for another beat. "Sir, if the Dravari Advance is as strong as those signals suggest, then a fleet couldn't stop them in time, and we're going to die either way," he said, without inflection. "The question is whether we die here or whether we do something useful first." He said it simply, as a fact, the way he'd been saying difficult things since he was an ensign himself, and had learned that the men and women around him needed the truth more than they needed comfort. The bridge crew had heard him. He could feel them listening even as they worked. Nobody said anything. Nobody stood down either. Voss looked at his navigation officer. "What have you got?" 14 Dravari warships in the Reach, sir. 8 destroyers, 4 cruisers, 2 carriers. Coalition forces are pulling back on 3 vectors. At current speed, the advance will be through Passage 7 in 38 minutes. "And the Shroud." The navigation officer looked up. "Sir? The asteroid field. How dense is it on the Dravari flank?" "Dense enough that their sensors would be heavily degraded, but a ship trying to operate in that environment would be exactly where they wouldn't expect to find one." Voss turned to Cho. "I want every missile tube loaded and a firing solution calculated for Passage 7's entry point before we hit the edge of the Shroud." Cho's expression was the expression of someone doing very fast mental math and arriving at a sum they found both terrifying and interesting. "Aye, sir. Helm, take us in." 3 systems away, on the Varath command carrier Serath's Blade, Fleet Commander Orin Avell was issuing the orders for the retreat. She did it methodically, as she did everything, because methodical was what the situation required. There was no value in rage or despair when you were trying to preserve the lives of the 11,000 personnel currently aboard the ships under her command. You looked at what you had. You looked at what the enemy had. You found the best path through, and you took it. What she had: 4 carriers, 9 cruisers, 22 destroyers, and a morale problem so severe she could see it in the faces of her bridge crew. 3 hours ago they had held the Reach. 1 hour ago the Dravari had brought up their reserves, 2 additional carrier groups that had somehow been hidden, somehow screened from Varath sensor sweeps, and everything had come apart with a speed that still didn't feel real. What the enemy had: more than her, more ships, more guns, and the momentum of an advance that had broken 3 defensive lines in 4 hours. She was retreating to buy time. Kesavor had evacuation corridors. If she could hold the Dravari advance for 60 minutes, the critical population centers could begin to move. It wasn't saving Kesavor, but 60 minutes might save 100 million lives. She wasn't sure she had 60 minutes to give. "Ma'am," her tactical officer, a young Varath male named Sevi, with more precision than nerve, turned from his station. "I'm receiving a signal from the outer Reach. Human transponder code." Orin looked up. "One ship?" "Yes, ma'am." "What class?" "It's..." Sevi hesitated. "It's a destroyer, ma'am. Halcyon class. I'm not finding it in the updated registry. It may be a decommission candidate." The bridge was quiet. Orin felt the quality of that quiet. The particular flat disbelief of people hearing something so improbable they haven't siege, yet decided how to react to it. "One human destroyer," she said. "Yes, ma'am." Her second officer, Commandant Wren, said what the bridge was thinking. They sent 1 ship. The words were shaped by something caught between contempt and exhaustion. The coalition sends out 17 frequencies of distress, and humanity sends 1 aging destroyer. Orin didn't respond to that. She kept her eyes on the tactical display. The Dravari advance was still moving. A clean, organized thrust through Passage 7, the way a force that had already won moved. Efficiently, without urgency. They were not expecting resistance at the 7. They had broken resistance at the 7. Whatever was behind them was fleeing, not fighting. She keyed the comms. "This is Fleet Commander Orin Avell. Varath Combined Command. To human vessel at the outer Reach. Identify yourself and your intentions." The response came back 30 seconds later, not because of communication delay. The Reach was close enough. 30 seconds because whoever was commanding that ship had taken time to formulate an answer. "Fleet Commander Avell. This is Commander Dara Voss, Earth Warship Ardent. Our intentions are to enter the shroud on your starboard flank and conduct operations against the Dravari advance at Passage 7. I'll need your retreat vectors to avoid friendly fire. A beat. And I'd appreciate it if your forces didn't try to escort us. We'll be harder to detect alone," Wren said, flatly. "He's going into the shroud." "I heard him," Orin said. 1 destroyer, against 14 ships. "I heard you, Wren." She heard herself too. Heard the thing she wasn't saying, which was that she didn't understand it. Human commanders were supposed to be calculating. Earth Space Command was famously conservative, famously slow to commit, famously reluctant to expend assets without a credible plan for success. 1 destroyer against 14 ships was not a credible plan. 1 destroyer in the shroud, running blind through an asteroid field with degraded sensors. That was not a strategy. That was... She stopped herself from finishing the thought. "Give him our retreat vectors," she said, "and route everything our sensors can still see in the shroud to his navigation systems." Wren turned. "You want to help him?" "He's going to die in there either way," she said. And she meant it the way she meant most hard things, as a fact, not a comfort. "The least we can do is give him a clear picture." She looked at the display. The Ardent's transponder had already vanished into the shroud's interference field. Inside the shroud, it was beautiful. Voss noticed this every time he operated in an asteroid field, and every time he felt slightly guilty about noticing it, because there were usually more pressing things to track. But the way the rock fragments caught starlight, the way the Ardent slid through corridors, of glittering debris, her running lights cutting amber lines through the dark. It reminded him of something he couldn't name, something old. "Passage 7 bearing," he said quietly. The bridge was quiet now. Not tense in the way a frightened crew was quiet. Quiet in the focused, compressed way of people doing hard things well. Bearing 147, descending 5 degrees. We're running parallel to the Dravari column at approximately 6,000 kilometers. Navigation's voice was steady. "They're using active sensors. The shroud is eating most of it, but we're going to start showing up on the edges of their sweep-in." "How long?" 11 minutes, sir. Give or take. 11 minutes. The Dravari advance was 17 minutes from exiting Passage 7 and entering open space. He had 11 minutes to make this count. "Cho, solution status." 8 solutions computed, sir. Priority targets are the 2 carriers. They're running their fighter bays hot. If we can take the flight decks offline, the rest of the advance loses its fighter cover. Cho pulled up the firing geometry. "But we're going to have to come up fast and fast on the entry to get firing angles on both before they can maneuver. It'll be close." "How close?" "We'll be at 4,000 kilometers when we fire, well inside their point defense envelope. They won't be tracking us at 4,000. They'll be tracking us at 6, if we're fast enough. We'll be fast enough." He looked at Adisa. "Shields to maximum. Tell engineering I want everything they can give to maneuverability, even if we have to pull from weapons recharge." Adisa turned to the comm station. Voss looked at the display. The slow, confident progress of 14 enemy ships through a passage they thought they owned. He thought about Greyhound. He'd read the record, the old Earth record, the naval destroyer that had done exactly this, not with missiles and particle lances, but with depth charges and nerve, hunting submarines through the North Atlantic, with one ship and a convoy to protect. The captain in that record had been asked afterward what he was thinking when he took his ship into the Black Pit. He'd reportedly said, "I was thinking about the ships behind me." Voss was thinking about Kessavor. "Helm," he said. "On my mark. Bring us up to maximum thrust. 40-degree ascent, and hold bearing 147. We're going to come up through the shroud's inner edge at speed, and present firing solutions, for approximately 45 seconds before they get a solid lock on us." "And after the 45 seconds, Helm asked, "we maneuver back into the shroud." "We might not be able to maneuver back into the shroud, sir. Not at that speed. At that angle." "The re-entry window." "I know," Voss said. "Hit the target first. We'll work out the re-entry problem after." The helm officer, Petty Officer Drays, 26 years old, from Lisbon, who could thread a destroyer through a debris field the way most people threaded a needle, said, "Aye, sir." "Mark." The Ardent came up. Fleet Commander Orin Avell was watching the shroud when it happened. She was watching it the way she watched things she couldn't control and couldn't stop. Steadily, without flinching. Because flinching didn't help. The Ardent's transponder had been dark for 9 minutes. Somewhere inside that wall of glittering rock, the human destroyer was either threading its way toward Passage 7, or it was already debris. Then the shroud lit up. Not the soft bioluminescence of disturbed asteroid dust, not the flare of a ship collision. The shroud lit up the way a weapon's discharge lit up vacuum, hard, white, brutal light. And on her tactical display, the Dravari advance formation shuddered. What was that? Reen was at her shoulder. The display was reorganizing around new data. The 2 Dravari carriers, Class 10 ships, each one displacing 4 times what the Ardent massed, had both lost their active sensor returns. Not destroyed, but the flight decks that had been reading as hot 10 seconds ago were now reading as cold. "He hit the carriers," she said. "With what?" "Ship killers. He must have fired 8 or 10 of them simultaneously." She watched the display. The Dravari destroyers were reacting now, spreading into a search pattern, trying to locate the source of the attack. But the shroud was chewing their sensors. He hit the flight decks. Not the drives. Not the bridge. The flight decks. He took the fighters off the table. Ren was quiet for a moment. "That's a precise shot. At that distance, through interference, to hit 2 different flight decks." He had solutions pre-computed. She was certain of it, without knowing why. He planned this before he went into the shroud. He knew where he was going to come up, and he knew exactly what he was going to shoot. She looked at the display again. "He's back in the shroud. Back." Ren stared at the display. The Ardent's transponder had vanished again. The Drevari search pattern was combing the outer edge of the shroud, lighting it up with active pings that were bouncing off 10,000 tons of rock and returning nothing useful. How did he? Because he's very good at this. The words came out before she'd decided to say them. She said them without heat or surprise, as a simple statement. Route me everything our sensors have on the interior of the shroud. We're in retreat. I know where we are, Ren. Route me the data. He did. She studied it. The Drevari advance had slowed, not stopped. They were still moving through Passage 7, still on course for Kesavor, still outnumbering everything in the reach, but the loss of fighter cover had made them cautious. They were compressing the formation, tightening it up, shrinking the exposure they were presenting to whatever was in that asteroid field. They were afraid of one ship. She couldn't explain what she was feeling. She'd commanded fleets. She'd directed engagements that involved hundreds of ships and millions of tons of metal moving at fractions of light speed. She understood large-scale warfare in the way only people who had truly lived inside it could understand it. And yet watching the Drevari formation tighten against a threat they couldn't see, a single human destroyer moving through an asteroid field like a ghost. I have a signal from the Ardent, ma'am. The voice that came through her comms was the same as before, unhurried, not casual. Nothing about it was casual, but there was no panic in it. There was nothing in it except attention. Fleet Commander Avel, we've taken the Drevari carrier flight decks offline. That gives you approximately 40 minutes before they can get emergency flight operations running from secondary bays. I'd recommend using those 40 minutes to reposition your forces on their flank, cut off the exit from the reach, and force them to turn and fight rather than advance. If they're committed to Kesavor, a flanking action will complicate that. I'll continue to harass from the shroud, but this will only work if your forces stop retreating and make them hold. The bridge was completely silent. Oren looked at the display. The Drevari formation had slowed. The flanks were exposed. The coalition forces she'd been retreating toward two exits from the reach. Exits that were, she realized as she looked at the geometry, positioned almost perfectly for exactly the maneuver the human was describing. 40 minutes. Fighter cover stripped. The Drevari advance in the throat of the passage, unable to accelerate without re-exposing their flanks to whatever was living in that asteroid field. He planned this too. The thought came with a strange certainty. He knew we'd stop retreating if he gave us a reason. He wasn't just going in there to hit those carriers. He was going in there to give us the thing we needed to turn around. Ren, she said quietly. Order a halt to the retreat. Ma'am. All forces. Hold position. I want the second cruiser group to move toward Exit 4. Flag Captain Saren's destroyers to Exit 2. She pulled up the tactical overlay and started marking vectors. Her hands were steady. We're not retreating. Ma'am, the Drevari still have. They have 14 ships in a passage, she said. We have 35 ships on their flanks. Without fighters, without the ability to advance, without exposing themselves to whatever's in the shroud, 14 ships in a passage are not the force they were 4 minutes ago. She looked up, and we have a human destroyer in that asteroid field who just told us exactly how to win this battle. Ren said nothing for a moment. Then, quietly, he's going to run out of missiles. Yes, she said. He is. She kept her eyes on the display. Get me a firing solution for the Drevari formation at the Passage 7 throat. When their formation is fully committed to the turn, I want everything we have. Everything? Everything. The Ardent ran. There was no other word for it. She ran through the shroud, dodging rock at speeds she was not designed to maintain in debris fields, her hull singing with micro-impacts. Petty Officer Drays threading her through gaps that Voss would not have believed existed until he saw them. They had fired their second salvo 8 minutes ago, not at the carriers this time, but at the Drevari cruiser's weapons arrays, picking off the forward guns that could most easily track the shroud's edge. The cruisers had been hurt. Not killed. Hurt. The Ardent had also been hurt. Port particle lance is offline, Cho reported, without inflection. We took a hit from a search round. Point defense ate most of it, but the capacitor for the lance is gone. Can we repair it? Not in the next. An alarm. The display shifted. Ma'am, sir, the coalition forces are moving. Voss looked at the display. The Varath carrier group, the Serath's blade at its center, was no longer retreating. It was turning. The other coalition elements were moving with it, coordinated. Using the exits from the reach the way a closing hand used fingers, she listened. The thought arrived with a warmth he didn't have time for. She heard what I was telling her, and she turned around. Helm. Bring us to the outer edge of the shroud. I want firing angles on the Dravari rear guard. Whatever they have facing the reach exit. I want it occupied so it can't engage the Coalition's flanking force. Sir, we're down to 4 ship killers and the starboard lance. If we come out to engage the rear guard, we hold their attention, Voss said. That's what we have left to give. Hold their attention, and let her finish it. Adisa looked at him. He met her eyes for a moment. She gave him one precise nod. Helm, Voss said. Take us out. She saw the Ardent come out of the shroud. Oren saw it on the tactical display. The single green transponder blossoming back into sensor range on the Dravari's exposed rear, and even from here, even through the chaos of the engagement that was now fully, genuinely, impossibly turning in the Coalition's favor, she could read what the Ardent was doing. She was making herself visible. The Dravari rear guard had 3 destroyers, 3 against 1. The Ardent came out at speed, fired her remaining ship killers at the weapons arrays of the nearest, and then cut hard. Not back into the shroud, but along the shroud's outer edge, staying just inside the interference boundary where the Dravari sensors kept losing and reacquiring her. Not hiding, presenting. Here, look at me. Turn around. 2 of the 3 Dravari destroyers turned. That left 1 on the Coalition flanking axis, and Flag Captain Saren's destroyers hit it from 3 directions at once and left it burning. The battle lasted another 40 minutes. Oren didn't have time, in those 40 minutes, to think about the Ardent. There was too much to do, too many orders to give, too many lives balanced on the decisions she was making in fractions of seconds. But some part of her was tracking it. Some part of her knew where that green transponder was the entire time. It was still there when the Dravari formation broke. Not a retreat, a break. The organized withdrawal of a force that has been beaten, the carriers, unable to scramble fighters, began pulling back first. The cruisers followed. The destroyers covered the retreat with practiced efficiency, because even a beaten Dravari force was not a disorganized one. Oren let them go. She wasn't in a position to pursue. Her forces had taken damage in the flanking engagement, and more importantly, the battle was over. Kesavor was safe. The reach was held. She looked at the display. The green transponder was still there. Damage report on the Ardent, she said. Sevi's voice was careful. She's taken significant damage, ma'am. Port lance offline. Hull breaches on decks 4 through 6. Secondary systems across the board. She's still moving, but she'll need major repair. Casualties? We're not reading any. A pause. No life sign lost that we can confirm. Oren let out a breath she hadn't known she was holding. Route me a direct channel. A moment. Then, open. Ma'am. She looked at the display. She looked at the transponder. She thought about what she was going to say, and nothing she thought of seemed right, seemed equal to what that ship had done and what it had cost. She pressed the channel. Commander Voss. Static. A long moment. Then his voice, and it was exactly the same as before. Not surprised, not triumphant. Not anything except that quality of attention that she'd been noticing from the first second, and still couldn't quite name. Fleet Commander Avel. The battle is won, she said. Yes, he said. I can see that. You're damaged. We are. Nothing we can't manage. We're going to escort you to the Veroth repair yards at... That's not necessary, Fleet Commander. We can make it to the Coalition supply depot on our own. I know you can, she said. I'd like to escort you anyway. A pause. Longer than his pauses usually were. She wondered what he looked like. She'd spent this entire battle watching a transponder and listening to a voice, and she found herself wanting very much to know what the face behind that voice looked like. That would be acceptable, he said. She became aware that her bridge crew was watching her. She became aware that she had moved, at some point in the last minute, to stand directly in front of the communications panel rather than at her command station, a small and completely involuntary breach of protocol. She made herself step back. We'll move into escort formation in 30 minutes. In the meantime, is there anything you need? Another pause. Then, quietly, we could use medical supplies. Nothing critical. A couple of my crew took injuries in the hull breach. I'll send a shuttle immediately. Thank you, Fleet Commander. Oren, she said before she could stop herself. My name is Oren. Ren was staring at her. Every officer on the bridge was, with various expressions she noted and didn't address. The voice on the comms was quiet for a moment. Then, Dara. The shuttle docked with the Ardent 50 minutes later. Oren had not intended to be on it, and yet here she was, in the docking corridor of a Halcyon-class destroyer that smelled of burned conduit and recycled air, and something she couldn't identify that turned out, when she thought about it, to be the specific smell of a ship that had been pushed very hard and was resting now. The kind of exhaustion that was not defeat. The commander was waiting for her in the corridor. She had expected a large man. Something in the voice suggested size, solidity. He was not large. He was average height, perhaps a little above, dark-haired, with a face that was difficult to age. There was a burn mark on his left forearm that she suspected was recent. His uniform was immaculate, which surprised her. After the battle they'd just had, she would not have been surprised to find him in a ship suit. He looked at her, and she looked at him. The Varath were not, by human standards, expressively reactive. Their faces moved less than human faces. Their emotional cues registered in different registers, in the precise alignment of posture, in the microdilation of the chromatophores along the jaw, in the way the silvered secondary membrane of the eye either engaged or rested. Oren was aware that most humans couldn't read these cues. She was also aware that this one was trying to, not intrusively, not with the fascinated intrusion of someone who had never seen a Varath before, but with the same focused attention he seemed to bring to everything. She was chromatic along her jaw. She couldn't feel it happening. That was the mortifying part. She never could. "Fleet Commander," he said. And then, after a beat, "Oren." "Commander." She paused. "Dara." The corridor was not the right place for what she wanted to say. The corridor was narrow and smelled of burned conduit, and there were crew members passing through it, nodding to their commander, giving her the specific sidelong look that personnel gave when they were trying not to appear to be looking at something. She said it anyway, because she'd spent her career saying the right thing in the wrong place, and it had never once stopped being the right thing. "I did not believe one ship could do what you just did," she said. He didn't say anything immediately. She had the impression that this was characteristic, that he let things settle before he responded. "I didn't know if it would work," he said. "I knew what we needed to accomplish. I didn't know if we could. But you went anyway." There were 900 million people on Kesavor. He said it without drama, the same way he'd said everything. As a fact, going seemed preferable to not going. She looked at him for a long moment. The chromatophores along her jaw, she was certain, were doing something she would regret when she saw a mirror. She said what she was thinking, because she was Oren Avel, and she had not built a career on saying things she didn't mean. "My second officer said that humanity sent one ship to answer a coalition distress call, and meant it as a criticism. I know what it looks like. He was wrong," she said. "Not about the number. About the significance." She paused. One ship was enough, not because of what the ship was, but because of the person commanding it. She held his gaze. "I have commanded larger forces for longer than you've been alive, most likely. I have never seen anyone use a force the way you used the Ardent today." He was quiet. Then, "I had a complete picture of the shroud's interior. Your sensor data made it possible. I know. I gave you the data because I thought it might help you die less uselessly." She let the honesty of that sit. "I gave you a map. You made something out of it that I wouldn't have thought to make. Those are different things." Something shifted in his expression. Small and controlled. The way everything about him was small and controlled, but present. "I had good crew," he said. "Yes. And good crew follows a good commander." She paused. "Will you have dinner with me?" His eyebrows moved, fractionally. "On the Serath's blade? Unless you'd prefer somewhere else." He was quiet for a moment, then that expression again. The small one, the controlled one. It took her a moment to recognize it as amusement, not laughter, not a smile exactly. Something quieter than both. "I'd prefer your ship," he said. "Ours smells like burning at the moment." "It smells like winning," she said. "That too." She stepped back slightly to clear the corridor for a pair of passing technicians. In the movement, her hand brushed his forearm, the one with the burn mark, and she stopped, and he stopped, and for a moment, they were both very still. "Does it hurt?" she said. "Not much," he said. She looked at the burn, which was fresh enough to still be raised. She looked at his face. She said, "I'll have our ship's physician look at it, Fleet Commander." "Auron," she said again. "And I'm not asking." She paused. "That is a Veroth commander's prerogative. You're under escort. Your health is my concern." He looked at her for a long moment. Then, quietly, "Auron." The chromatophores along her jaw were definitely visible. She didn't look away. "Dara," she said. They had dinner. It was a small thing. In the context of what had happened, one man across a table from one woman, in a quiet room off the Sereth's Blades officer mess, while 208 people aboard the Ardent slept the sleep of people who had survived something they hadn't necessarily expected to survive. They talked for 3 hours. He talked about the shroud, about what it had been like inside it, the beauty of it, the way the rock moved and the light caught it. She talked about the Verath Reach, the way the Tyrant system had looked before the war, when she'd brought her junior officers through it on a training exercise and watched them argue about who had the better view from the port side, observation deck. He talked about Greyhound. She didn't know the word, and he explained it. The old record, the destroyer, the black pit, and she listened to it with an attention she recognized as the same attention she'd heard in his voice on the comms, now turned back on her. She understood, by the end of the evening, why he'd done what he'd done. Not as strategy, as something older than strategy. "You're not going to accept a commendation for this," she said. It was not a question. "Command is going to try to give me one," he said. "I'm going to lose that argument." "I outrank Command," she said. "I'll give you one myself." "Fleet Commander, Auron." The corner of his mouth moved. "You're not going to stop doing that." "No. Then I'm going to stop trying to be formal about it." He looked at her. The room was quiet. Somewhere down the corridor, 2 of her junior officers were having an argument about trajectory calculations that she could hear, faintly through the bulkhead. "Auron," she looked at him. The way he said her name was different. She wasn't sure how to classify it. She wasn't sure she needed to. "There are going to be people who say you should have sent more ships," she said. "Your command. People in the coalition. There will be reviews and briefings, and someone will call it reckless." "There aren't more ships," he said. "I know. That's not the point I'm making." He waited. "The point I'm making," she said carefully, "is that I intend to be in those briefings. I intend to tell them what I saw, what one human ship did, in the shroud, with 4 minutes and a set of solutions that took most of the Dravari fleet by surprise." She paused. "And I intend to tell them what that commander said to me when I tried to thank him. I haven't said anything worth repeating. You said there were 900 million people on Kesavor. Going seemed preferable to not going." She looked at him steadily. "That is worth repeating. In every briefing, on every station, to every officer in the coalition who has spent this war wondering whether humans actually believe in this alliance or whether they simply find it convenient." He was quiet for a long moment. The quiet was different now than the quiet on the bridge. It had weight to it, personal weight. The weight of something being received rather than processed. "That's a great deal to put on one dinner," he said finally. "It's a great deal to put on one ship," she said. "You managed." The corner of his mouth moved again. This time it stayed. Not quite a smile, but near enough that she understood she was seeing something he didn't show easily, and something that she intended to see again. "The escort," he said. "How long will it take to reach the repair yards? At the Ardent's current speed? 4 days. 4 days. Yes. Will you have dinner with me tomorrow as well?" She looked at him. The chromatophores along her jaw were doing what they had been doing since she stepped off the shuttle, and she had stopped trying to control them. "And the day after," she said. "And the day after that." He nodded. "Once. Precisely. The way he did everything. Then I'll look forward to it," he said. Outside the Sereth's Blades viewports, the stars were very still, and the Tyrant Reach, battered, broken in places, debris still drifting through the gap at Passage 7, held the quiet of a place where something enormous had been decided. 900 million people would wake up tomorrow on Kesavor. The Dravari advance had retreated into the dark. The shroud of the outer reach glittered, the way it always glittered, beautiful and indifferent, hiding nothing now except the silence of rock and starlight. And in a quiet room off the officer mess of the Verith carrier Sereth's Blade, Two people sat across a table from each other and talked about the view from portside observation decks, and the way light moved through asteroid fields, and all the things worth fighting for. End.